So I embarked into nursing, even if I did not necessarily loved it, from a Filipino nurse who was once in that position, who wanted to transition from the Philippines to the United States. And I didn't have enough support when I was transitioning. It took me 2 years to get to the promotion. And then suddenly it was just in a snap of a finger, I was demoted.
Welcome to Meaningful Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering with me, Joseph Alcantara. Together, we'll uncover the power of purpose, experience mentorship magic, unpack ways to make a difference, and find transformative journeys as a community. Welcome to another episode of Meaningful Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering. And today we have a very, very special guest and also a friend. So before I introduce him to you, I'd like to dive into his amazing credentials. So he is an internationally educated nurse with more than 15 years of professional experience in various clinical and educational settings in the Philippines, the United Arab Emirates, and the United States. His area of expertise include critical care in both acute and long-term settings, healthcare quality, and education in clinical and academic settings. He holds a PhD in development education, 2 masters in nursing, and a Bachelor of Science in nursing, and a postgraduate certificate in training to teach in medicine from Harvard Medical School. He has presented at international and national conferences and published journals. He also has a lot of notable accolades under his belt, such as a first place award for his capstone project at Harvard Medical School, and currently recognized as Asia's Distinguished Nurse Educator by Asia's Pinnacle Awards 2023. Currently, he's the Director of Clinical Education and Development at InsightGlobal Health, where he is responsible for leading the development and implementation of an international transition to practice program for internationally educated nurses migrating to the United States. He loves to travel and to experience different cultures. He has visited 28 countries to date and hopes to explore more in the future. Please welcome my friend, Dr. Arnold Tariga. Hi, Arnold!
Hi, Joseph. Thank you so much for having me this morning.
So, first of all, how are you?
I'm doing very well. It's a sunny morning in Boston. It has been a bit cold for the last few days, I would say, but today it's not that cold. It's sunny, so I'm happy.
It's quite interesting because I know you as a friend. So let's start from the very beginning, Arnold. What's your meaningful life story? Take me back from the very beginning and how you're able to achieve where you are today.
Of course. Okay, so I'm gonna start where I was born. I am born to a middle-income family from Bohol. I am the eldest of 3 siblings, and being Filipino, you know how it is, the responsibility of being the eldest. So I grew up not having everything. So I think the value of really working hard to get what I want, to get something, I would say has been engraved and embedded in my system since I was young. And I would say that I used those values, when I started my schooling, my studying, and even when I started working. And in 2004, so I would say 2003, like I was about to graduate high school. In 2004, I eventually decided to embark into my nursing journey. Um, and fun fact is that I did not love nursing initially. I've wanted to become an educator and
Oh,
a physicist at the same time because I fell in love with my physics teacher. Like she was just so good, and I really enjoyed the subject. Um, but then I think at the time, nursing was very, I would say, very popular in terms of people going abroad because they said that if you're a nurse, it will be easier for you to move to the U.S. and um, it will give you a better life. So I embarked into nursing, even if I did not necessarily loved it initially. But I think the more I was exposed to the hospital settings and I think taking care of patients, I would say that I found more meaning in what I do
mm,
as a person and as a nurse, and I eventually fell in love with it. So um, if I have to be honest, like the first year that I was in nursing school, like I thought that I'm gonna quit
Mm.
It's because I didn't like the smell of the hospitals. I didn't like seeing the wounds and stuff, typical things that you see in the hospitals. But the more I dig deeper, the more I get to know the stories behind all those things, and seeing how I am able to impact and help others as they try to recover from their illnesses, for example, or as they try to recover from the heartbreak of losing a loved one or something like that. Like, it made me realize that, and not because I'm a nurse, I would say that nurses are actually really angels in a way, because they help people more than their physical needs. Like, there's a lot of things that nurses really do. Um, and with that, like I of course I pursued nursing, finished nursing in 2008, got my registration as a nurse. So I worked in the Philippine setting for almost, I would say, around 3 years. But and you might know this because having Ryan as your partner, and um, nursing in the Philippines is quite challenging. It's very rewarding as a profession, but it's not very rewarding financially. So I decided to look for greener pastures, and life brought me to the Middle East.
Mm.
So I started working there as a bedside nurse, and then moved into different pathways. Started in leadership. It did not work out well for me. Um, and that was a turning point. Anyway, went into the ladder, but it was very difficult as a Filipino. That's one thing, and as a non-Western trained professional, because I think, and this is one thing that I did not realize while I was working abroad. Like, when you work in an international or a multinational company, sometimes they prefer Western trained as opposed to non-Western trained. Even if you're qualified or even if you're very hardworking, sometimes they do not see that. So I really worked hard to go up the ladder. Initially, it worked, but then eventually it did not. There were At one point I was demoted from my leadership position. Again, just because the executives did not believe that I am capable of doing it because I was not Western trained. But looking back at that experience, like, I feel like that was the turning point in my career because it redirected me to where I'm supposed to be. I found education as my niche, and I fell in love with it. And I feel like being a nurse educator has given me a different meaning in terms of what I do.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I pursued nursing education, clinical nursing education as a specialty, and eventually moved from different organizations. And I also did some part-time teaching in academia. And when the opportunity came, I've always had that American dream before when I started nursing school. So the opportunity came up, and decided to take the leap and move into the United States. And here I am. I think over the last almost 2 years, I've worked. I started as a bedside nurse, and then eventually worked in one of the universities here as an assistant professor in nursing. And um, this is the latest job, working as a director of clinical education, which I really love and I'm very passionate about.
Wow. What a journey, Arnold. It's like, okay, I like to unpack a lot of things based on the story that you've mentioned because there are like really a lot of lessons to be learned,
Mhm.
a lot of great insights as well. Let's start with when you said that, oh, I actually didn't want to be a nurse, but I
Mhm.
chose it because it's, the pathway for me to explore that opportunity that eventually would potentially lead to success.
Mhm.
What was that trigger point that allowed you to then realize that, okay, I love this, and this would be a good starting point so that I can eventually be an educator? And then it will be my way to, eventually go into that path of greener pastures or to reach that American dream that you
Mhm.
already had in your mind.
So I would say there's a lot of triggers. There were a lot of pivots as well, all throughout in my career. As I said initially, I didn't love it, but then getting exposed, and I would say that I had one experience when I was with a patient, and so I work in the intensive care unit, and
Mhm.
the patient, we thought that the patient will die just because the prognosis was really bad. The patient went into um, a motor vehicular accident, and the patient has a lot of comorbidities. Like, he had a lot of diseases, and therefore, like, doctor said to the family member that chances are he might not make it. And he was in the ICU for a few weeks. with the ventilator tubes and stuff like that. And the family member was just really there. And like, we also take care of the patient constantly, of course. Um, and having that conversation with the family member, and hearing the family member uh, thank us for the hard work that we do, the time that we really spent to take care of her husband, made me realize that I'm doing something different. I'm making an impact. And for some people, nurse for some people they might just think that nurses are just doing their jobs. But to us and to me as a nurse, it's more than that. I don't think of the pay, because working in the Philippines is not really pay very well as a nurse. But
Yeah.
it's really, I think, the fulfillment of doing something that's impactful to that person. And after a few weeks, like, the person was able to recover. And a few months later, I was working in the mall, and I actually met the family together
Oh.
again. Yeah. So it was just so like, wow, this is so gratifying, to see that at one point I took care of this dying person, and now this person is like walking around. And that was one of, I think, the pivots in my initial nursing career that really made me realize that I want to do this as I want to do this for life. I want to be a
Mm.
nurse for life. But then, at one point in your career, sometimes you will also want to grow. And that was when I said, like, I want to grow, to go into a specific ladder in nursing. And I think in the Philippines, you don't necessarily have a lot of options like you have here in the United States in terms of career progression. So like the pathways, and this was during my time, which was like 15 years ago when I started nursing. Um, the pathways are usually between going into the leadership ladder or going into the educational ladder. Like here in the US, you have hundreds of subspecializations for nurses. So my mind was set on like, okay, I think leadership is the way for me.
Mm.
Um, I didn't necessarily have a lot of leadership training, like in the Philippines. And again, I'm speaking from experience. Sometimes, if you have those leadership qualities, you can either be taken as that can either be taken as something positive, or that can be seen as a threat to those leaders who are already there. And I was a person who studies a lot, so I felt like they have seen me as, oh, maybe this person is a threat because this person wants to study and also wants to grow and something like that. Um, and yeah, I still pursued it anyway. But I did not really sort of grow as a leader back home because I was also looking at the financial side of it. I want to support myself and my family. So I went abroad and still pursued leadership pathway. And as I said, it did not work out well for me, because I was seen as somebody who was not qualified just because I didn't have, I would say, the right nationality at that time while I was working there. Um, and, at the time, like, I would say that I felt bad, because the system was not very supportive of people like me, a person of color, a person who's not Western trained. Um, but then I realized that that was sort of like a preparation for me for the things that will come my way, all the circumstances that I have faced, because it has given me a different perspective about life. And as I said earlier, that pivot, that downfall at one point in my career has redirected me to where I am now. And um, I've even sort of like had a mantra now that rejections are redirections to your best destinations. Because if I would not have been rejected at that time, I would not have found clinical education as something that I would really enjoy doing. And when I started doing what I love doing with clinical education, teaching both in the hospital settings and in academia, um, I would say that I've blossomed. And people have said the same thing, like, you've really grown, you're good at what you do. And yeah, I think in a way I'm able to give myself that opportunity to grow, and at the same time I'm also able to give back to the people who I feel needs my help and support. And that's the thing, when you find that something that really gives you that spark, that really gives you the motivation, the inspiration to do your best, things will just unfold itself. Things will just follow.
Is boom, just very powerful and really very inspiring, Arnold's. Like, again, lots to unpack there. So first, what triggered you to realize that, okay, nursing is for me, is having that beautiful anecdote of helping change the life and making that impact,
Mhm.
from that patient who almost thought, you guys almost thought, will be dying, but eventually found, like, second lease of life. And that's beautiful. And then your anecdote about leadership and being under that microscope,
Mhm.
or, having that failing forward attitude because of, the circumstances or the odds against you because of the setting where you were. And then how you've approached it in a way that you took that pivot, you took it positively, and you found it as a way for you to be able to reach new heights, right?
Mhm.
That is not a common, I would say, generally for some people, they'll just surrender. It's like, okay, I give up. This is not the right path for me. But you took the very pragmatic and positive approach. What eventually led you to that path of that beautiful journey of blossoming eventually, despite all the negative scenarios?
Mhm. I would say that there were a lot of things that helped me out, but I just would like to point out as well, Joseph, that when that thing happened, as a normal human reaction, like I was very devastated when that happened because, again, I really worked hard to achieve to the certain level. Um, just to state a very good example, when I started the leadership journey, for example, there were two of us who were in that role. The other one was a Westerner. The Westerner was promoted in just 6 months. It took me 2 years to get to that promotion. And then suddenly it was just in a snap of a finger, I was demoted. So um, I went through depression for almost a year after that happened. I removed myself from a lot of things. I was, this once very active nurse became very aloof. Like I didn't want to participate in anything. But then one day I realized, I don't know, I just woke up one day and realized that if I will keep doing that to myself, like I will be the one who will be at a loss because um, nothing will happen to me. I can either stay in that depressed mindset and stuff, um, feel sorry for myself, and or I can actually change my perspective about things, look for help, look for support, and eventually get out of that difficult situation. I started reading self-help books. One of the first books that really made an impact to me was that I can always remember is The Rules to Break by Richard Templar. Like Richard Templar writes like I think the Rules series and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I can vividly remember reading the book and it taught me a lot of lessons, especially about how to go against the flow. Because I think in my experience, like with my experience in the Middle East, like I have always been siloed that you're a Filipino nurse, you're not supposed to go up in the ladder because Filipino nurses are supposed to be bedside nurses. You're not created or you're not developed to become leaders in healthcare and stuff. Um so yeah, that book taught me to go against the flow, pursue what you love doing. Of course, try not to step on other people. Just do what you want to, what you love doing, what you're very passionate about. Um, Aside from that, I also learned to listen to podcasts and YouTube videos. I really find that very helpful. Um, of course, as a Roman Catholic, my faith has been very strong as well. Of course, it was rocked during that time, but um, I was able to find some YouTube videos about sermons in terms of how to get up, how to trust the process, how to trust God's plan for you. And another thing is like really finding those people who have the same experiences to gain their insights as well. And I think this is where mentoring is really very important because um, there were a lot of senior nurses that I had there, nurses of color from different nationalities as well. Um, I became very good friends with two senior nurses from South Africa, and they know my struggles. So I spoke with them and I opened up about my emotional turmoil at the time, and they gave me a lot of perspectives in terms of like how to get up and like how the world is. The world might set some limitations in you. People might have a different perspective about how you can grow or how you cannot grow based on whatever mold they will put you in, it's really you who can break that mold. It's really you who have the power to get out there, prove that you can. And you don't even have to prove to others, you just have to prove to yourself that you can do it. Because like before, like I would say that one of the initial reaction, of course, is to prove that no, I can do this. Like even if people will not, I can do this, I'm going to show you. And I would be lying if I say if I'll tell you that I did not sort of do that initially, when I started getting back on track. Like I would want to show these people that I can do this and that. But eventually I realized that it's not really a competition, and it's not necessarily proving others, because they will always have their mindset anyway. You cannot change that. That's beyond your control. I would presume that the leaders who have who have treated me that way, they might still have the same perception right now, and maybe that's me. Like it's really their perception that maybe Filipinos are not born to lead, for example. Even if they'll see me succeeding in the pathway that I am right now, that might still not change. If I go back there, they might still not employ me as a leader or something like that, because that's their perspective. So I feel like getting the help from mentors, asking for their insights, helping yourself by also listening to other people's experiences. A lot of podcasts, for example, for this, people who might be listening to this and who might have gone through the same experiences will hopefully learn that there are things that they can go to, or that they can use to help themselves up in times when they are down.
That is great. I was like a lot of takeaways again for me, Arnold. There, I was like, it's if I were to summarize it in a toolkit, everything that you've just mentioned is like it's learning, getting help,
Mm-hmm.
having faith, finding the right community, your
Yeah.
friends, and those people who are supporting you, and having the trust in yourself, which I think is really very powerful, especially for this generation where
Mm-hmm.
universally, that's the blessing and the curse of social media or being
Sure.
accessible with everything. Content is democratized, whether good and or bad.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is in our hands. So it's a matter of
Exactly.
finding ways to use it in a very positive or productive way, which I think is going to be very helpful.
Yeah.
So let's go into the lighter side of things,
Mm-hmm.
because that was a beautiful journey, right? And then, like, literally, that journey led you to where you are here in
Mm-hmm.
the US. As a director of clinical education and development, what's your typical day like? What's that role like? And what do you do?
Okay, a typical day. I would say it's the same typical day for everyone working in a corporate world. So I usually wake up at around 6, and of course, after waking up, the routine is really like wake up, have my morning prayers, fix the bed, take my maintenance meds, and then and then do morning walks, which, if I have to be honest, can sometimes be a bit challenging, with the weather. Sometimes I don't feel like walking around the neighborhood when it's like very cold, but I do try my best. And while I do my morning walks, I make it a point to really listen to podcasts, like, just like walking there, looking at the nice neighborhood and stuff like that. And when I come home, I usually have my morning coffee before I start working. And then I also try to look at my calendar so that I know what to expect for the day. And then I start working. Yeah. And it usually, I think mornings are quite crazy mornings. It's usually like meetings, back to back meetings and stuff. And then all throughout the day. So the thing with, I think for my role, because this is sort of like a new program, and I would say that not many organizations, staffing organizations, have done this, because what we are doing, just to give you a quick background as to what we do, um, we we are doing training, or we are delivering this international transition to practice program for our Filipino nurses who want to transition to the US. But the way we are doing it is that we are delivering it there in the Philippines, as opposed to it happening here in the US. Because the traditional way of training nurses as they transition is that hospitals or organizations bring them here in the US. They get the training at the hospital system itself once they start. We do it beforehand, because, and based on my experience and the experiences of a lot of nurses, it's always very helpful for them to be prepared mentally, physically, skills wise, before they come here, so that they won't have to struggle a lot in terms of adaptation and integrating themselves in their new community and in their new healthcare systems, right? So that's why I'm really very passionate about what I do, because I can see myself as one of those nurses who needs this type of support. Um, so sorry, I digressed, but
No.
yeah, part of the things that I do is, I also teach in those virtually, of course, and sometimes I do travel to the Philippines to do some in-person teachings. But I have a group of educators who are doing the majority of the teachings, and then I do support from time to time. So yeah, there will be times that I will be teaching. Majority of the day, it's really also monitoring our key performance indicators, as a team, as an organization, making sure that the education side of it is done very well. Especially that I'm not really there, which is a bit challenging if I have to be honest. Um, but yeah, all throughout the day, it's really just back-to-back meetings with my team here in the US, with my educators there in the Philippines, and then with our hospital partners, the education team of our hospital partners. Um, of course, I also try to find some breaks in between. Sometimes it can be very difficult though to remove yourself out of in front of this laptop, because I think once the meeting starts, sometimes you get pulled into different meetings that you don't even plan for the day. So I'm really trying my best as well to make sure that I set that boundary of like, how many meetings can I take for the day? What
Mm,
time am I willing to extend beyond my working hours? Because sometimes I do extend beyond my working hours just because of the time zone difference. So like with my Philippine team, like we are 12 hours, 13 hours opposite. So I usually work from 8 to 5, but because my team is sleeping that time, so sometimes I have to meet them after 6, 7, 8 p.m. So yeah, so now I'm trying to be very good at it, and I always emphasize on my team as well, Leona, that I also want to be respectful of their time, because sometimes they do have to stay up late as well to meet with me in my morning. But we make sure that it's like a fair distribution of those late night meetings. And of course, after my day, I try to make sure that I have some downtime to just chill in the living room and spend time with my roommate's dog, Lucy. Because yeah, it just relaxes me, and I think at the end of the day, I think for most of us, like you working in a corporate world as well, things can just go ballistic at any point of the day. So I I personally just make sure that I have that downtime, watch Netflix, just or watch movies that I love, and then have good dinner, and then have enough time to sleep.
yeah. Oh, wow. That was like, it's very structured and I love it because you planned your day from the time you wake up to the time you do your relaxation, which I think is one of the key areas why successful people are successful. I've read stories about how, say, for example, Mark Zuckerberg and even Steve Jobs back in the day were like structuring their day by waking up
Mhm.
early, like 4 in the morning, and they don't even plan their outfit because they only have one colored shirt, for example, because it actually gives opportunity for them to be productive and purposeful, which I think based on how you've also laid out your day, it's like from the very beginning to the end, it's a combination of productivity and being purposeful because of the stuff that you do for your company and then for
Mhm.
yourself and then for the people that you help transition, right? So, on that part of knowing that you make a key difference to those people that are like literally helping transition. And for me, hearing it, it's not just a job transition, but it's a life transition because you're like literally uprooting them in the Philippines, taking them here in the US. And adjustment when it comes to life in general is
Mhm.
challenging, right?
Yes.
So, what were, if you're gonna identify those key moments that really fulfills you in this current role that you're playing, especially that you're involved with the enrichment of life or kind of improving the quality of life of other people,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to their future, what would be those ultimate highs that you experience that makes you realize that this is really the job for me and I'd want to do it
Mhm.
every single time?
So as I mentioned earlier, this is actually a fairly new program that we did. I started with the organization in January of this year, and the training program started in July. The training usually lasts for 4 months, and we just had our first 10 nurses arrive in the US last November.
Oh.
Yeah. So when with this current role, when those nurses landed here, and they started working at the facility in their first few days. Um, Receiving a message from them that saying that how grateful they are for the transition to practice program, because they really felt very, very prepared, not just with the work side of it, but actually very prepared in, integrating into their new immediate community. For me, that's like the highest highs that I've had, because it this program, I was stopped by the president and vice president of the organization to curate this program. So I developed the program, and of course, it has gone through a lot of revisions with the team. But I think, creating something with the intention of helping, and then seeing that it actually works and that people are very grateful for something that you created. um it just gives you that very good feeling that you are making a difference. And to your point, like, we are actually changing lives in a way, as much as this is a business. But at the same time, like, I don't usually look at it as a from the business side of it, because I look at it from an educator side of it, from a Filipino nurse who was once in that position, who wanted to transition from the Philippines to the United States. And I didn't have enough support when I was transitioning. Like, I came here on my own, not knowing a lot of things. Of course, I did my research and stuff, but it's still different when someone who had that experience actually shared that experience with you, with the aim of setting you up for success. So I felt like I sort of achieved that in a way that I've helped them succeed. And it's still a bit early to say, but um, I just feel like I helped prepare them, so that they will thrive here in the US.
That's a great definition of the highest of the high, because I think very similar to what you've mentioned earlier, what triggered you to realize that nursing is the right field for you is like when you saw a dying patient suddenly get well, and then a simple thank you message
Right.
from someone whom you kind of help get ready for their new
Mhm.
chapter is also another way to define what success is. Because for other people, I think our younger selves would say that,
Mhm.
okay, success for me would be if I get promoted from this
That's
position to
right.
that position, and then from being a staff member to being a leader, for
Mhm.
example, because it's part of the journey, right? So having heard that piece from you,
Mhm.
um how did you define success before, and how do you define that now? Because I'm sure that a lot of people who are listening, especially those first jobbers or those who are in their early 20s or 30s, that are just starting their career in
Mhm.
whatever field, would have a different kind of definition of success.
Mhm.
So in your perspective, after having worked for 15 years in different countries and being exposed to this kind of level of fulfillment that goes
Mhm.
beyond money and title, how do you define success now?
I think for me personally, I define success as finding that inner joy, that fulfillment, um, that happiness when you're doing something, something that, like, sort of warms your heart when you're doing that. For me, that is success. To your point, like, to your example, like, there has been a lot of, I would say, I've had variations of definition of what success means to me at one point. Yeah, when I was new to my career, of course, or when I finished nursing school, success for me was like finding that nursing job in a very big hospital, in a famous hospital. And then it has changed. Like, for me, success is when I go up the ladder. Um, and I think that definition of success stayed for a bit, while I was transitioning from the Philippines to the United Arab Emirates. Um, because that is how I perceive others are as well, in terms of their definition of success. Like, we always say that, oh, this person has been promoted, and that therefore that person is successful. Oh, this person had his or her master's degree or additional degrees and stuff. So at one point, it sort of became my definition of success. But I think once you get exposed more into what life really is, you get exposed to a lot of experiences, and then you realize that those things are actually temporary. Like, your title in a position can be taken away from you. That's not even within your control, not unless you own the company, of course. Like, you can own the company, put yourself as the CEO, and then decide to just be the CEO forever, then you can. For me, who's doesn't have a lot of money, I gotta decide what position I will be in. Like I have to apply for it, But yeah, I mean, like if those are the things that other people see as successful, and that's okay. That is their definition. And as I said, at one point that was my definition. Like I was at one point in my career, I was after titles, and I wanted to be this, I wanted to be that. But then I think when that pivot happened in my career, and I realized that I want to be an educator, I didn't even mind what title I will be given, as long as I'm gonna do education, as long as I'm gonna be teaching, as long as I'm gonna be mentoring, helping new nurses through my passion of teaching. So yeah, I've gone into different titles as an educator. For example, I work as a clinical resource nurse. I've worked as education coordinator and education manager, as an assistant professor, and now this is the director of clinical education. But for me, I still identify as an educator. If you strip me off with all these titles, with all the letters behind my names, I will still identify, I will still brand myself as a nurse educator, as a nurse and as an educator. And I can say, I'm sort of living the best of both worlds, being a nurse, because I really love nursing, and being an educator, doing what I'm very passionate about.
That's great. It's like when you mentioned that, it's like, when you strip off of all those, letters in your long title, which I've seen, which is amazing and impressive.
Thank you.
It's like a full circle moment for you as well, because you
Mhm.
started with, I don't want to be a nurse, I want to educate, but at the same time now you are in the field of education and also in the field of nursing. It's like a perfect combination,
Mhm.
and you're mentoring and changing lives, and also at the same time, you know, being a support and a resource for other people when it comes
Mhm.
to their, journey of success as well, which I think is another way to give back at the moment while
I
you do
agree.
your corporate role, which is actually great. So if, for example, you're going to go back and talk to the 21-year-old Arnold who's still figuring things out in
Mhm.
life, or the other 21-year-old kids who might be
Mhm.
listening to us today, who are either finding their way to, to realize what is the right path for them, is nursing the right path for them, is the Philippines the right place for them, or
Mhm.
traveling elsewhere is the place for them, what advice or suggestions or thoughts would you leave to them so that they can kind of find their way to their proper why or purpose in life?
Um, I would say it's sort of like few steps. First step is for sure to first find their why, or to find their passion. What are they really passionate about? And sometimes it's not easy, being a 21-year-old, just coming out of school, seeing how the world is. It can be a bit difficult. Sometimes it can be a bit confusing, really. Like, when you see that, oh, so this is the reality of the outside world. Like, I haven't seen this. And so is this really something that I want? So yeah, I think if and when you have the opportunity to find your why, and nowadays there's a lot of frameworks. For example, if you've I would presume that you know about the ikigai or the
Mhm.
Venn diagram, answering those questions so that you can be redirected to your why. That's one thing. And once you find your why, um, try to master yourself, and you know have the grit, have the perseverance to
Mhm.
work on achieving your why, because you can never go wrong when you know that this is your why and this is what you want to achieve. Like, I think based on my personal experience anyway, like everything just aligned when I found that my why was actually on teaching, and helping others through the power of education and training, because things just fell into place. Majority of the accolades, for example, that I receive now is really related to what I do. It's related to teaching. Um, so yeah, find your why, work hard, you know, invest in yourself, have the grit and the perseverance, and you will definitely achieve what you want in life.
That's a great piece of advice. And I hope that, the listeners will be able to learn from it and also live that eventually as they go through their journey. It's not easy. It's not going to be a perfect road, but I
Mhm.
think, having those key, takeaways and moments for
Mhm.
them to pause and apply those would be super meaningful. Um, and then finally, final question, I promise. I know you've given a
No
lot of
worries.
insight. We appreciate it. I ask all my guests this final question. And that question is, what does a meaningful life mean to you?
To me, a meaningful life is a life that is impactful for me as a person in my personal life and is impactful to others in my community and my surroundings.
That is beautiful. So, with that, amazing takeaways, amazing conversation. Thank you so much, Arnold, for being with us today. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day and good luck on the next chapters of everything else that you will be doing. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you so much, Joseph.